Hello everyone, welcome to NS Codes. Today we're going to do another entry-level tutorial. Today we're going to look at C# and operator overloading. Well, operator overloading and method overloading. In the modern zeitgeist of programming, there's a big push to not using operator overloading or method overloading. However, I think it's still important to understand how they work and when you should use them. Let's get straight to the code. I've already opened a Visual Studio window here with the C# project, and let's ask ourselves, well, what is a method overload? I will write a simple method, and of course we could likely call this method if we wanted to. Pretty simple. But what if we had a method that actually did something important? For example, wow, it's a tough one. I'm going to say write. Let's write to a file. Well, that's great. So if we had a program, we would now be able to write to that file. But now let's say, okay, well, what happens if we want to provide a stream to write that data? Would we really want to have another method that says write stream? Sorry, let me put the namespace here. Is this what we want to see in our code? I don't think so. That means we have this really cool feature called method overloading. Because the formal signatures are different, the compiler can actually guess and determine which method to call. Now, I've just introduced something new for many of you, and that's called formal method signature. Let me describe what the formal method signature is. Here we have the accessibility modifier: public, protected, private, internal. I'll write them down for you. Public, protected, internal, and private. Each of these accessibility modifiers does a different thing. Public means anyone with access to this class can call this method. Private means only this specific class can call this method. Internal means that anyone with access to the class program within this project or this DLL or this assembly is probably the better language, C#, can call this method. Protected means only the code within the class program can call this method, or derived classes. For example, a derived class would be public class new program. Protected means I now have access to write if I wanted to. I don't understand why it's not showing up. I'm doing a video here. Oh, I know why it's not showing up. I'm doing something silly. And you can see it now shows up because we have access. And because we have mixed access modifiers, we could call one but not the other and we get an exception. But this isn't an object-oriented class. I'm just demonstrating what these modifiers mean. I'm going to change this back to public. Now, back to formal method signatures. Void is the return type of our method. This means we're not returning anything. You could actually return anything you want that's allowed within your language. I could return an integer, return a string, Boolean, an object. For this case, we're not returning anything because we know it's going to work. Again, now we have the method name. The method name is, well, the method name is what we're going to call it by. And then we have the formal parameter list. And this is what becomes important when we talk about method overloading. The formal parameter list must be different to overload a method. Let me show you an example of a formal parameter list that isn't different. We have here string file name, and now I'm going to go string resource location. Notice how the types are the exact same, so the compiler can't tell which method to call. They're the exact same. Just changing the name of a parameter, of a formal parameter, does not help. You have to have an actual completely different signature for method overloading to work. You can see here now we have a completely different signature, so this will work. Okay. That is a formal definition. That is the definition of the formal definition of a method. How about that? Let's put this back. Now, okay, well, how are we going to use this in practice? I have created a class because I don't like writing anything in program, and we're going to start over. I'm going to make an animal. So we have some utility here. Please bear with me. This is an example, not some sort of perfect program. So we're going to do things wrong the first way, maybe the second way, maybe the third way. It's more about demonstration purposes only. Let's make a property for the animal type. Let's make a, I don't know, age. Let the animals have an age. All animals should have an age. And let's give them a weight. I assume animals have a weight. Okay. Let's provide a default constructor for our animal. Just to get rid of our squigglies here, and we'll set that animal type. And we'll also say the default age is 10 and the default weight is 3. It doesn't really matter. I'm just picking numbers here. All right. So we've written a simple class. Now what I want to do is rewrite our operators for writing this class to a file. Put the import. We already have the import because I prepared ahead of time. Sorry for the scrolling. I ambushed you. All right. Let's write to a file. Well, you know what? I don't want to do that. I want to write the code for streaming first, and you'll see why. What I would like to do is write this animal to any generic stream. And you notice we've overloaded this method. So let's create a stream writer. Notice that I'm not going to wrap a using operator around the stream because I don't own the stream. I'm assuming whoever calls this method will own this stream. Now I can write whatever I would like. And I'm going to write the animal type, the age, whoops, and the weight. And then just to be safe, I'm going to flush the stream. Okay, now let's pretend I wanted to pass in write with just a file name. Here's the way we would do that with method overloading, because remember, we want to write once. That means we don't want to duplicate code whenever possible. Now you might notice this file stream constructor is overloaded. And what's even crazier is originally this method used to do a very big error. And that is the formal parameter list changed depending on which method you're using. And I always had to look it up. It was crazy. But now I think they fixed them, or I just can't remember the error because I've changed the way I write code. So what we have here is we create a file stream using the using. This means when we're done, the file stream will be closed, all the resources will be getting rid of. And now we can just call our write method with this file stream. And you'll see no more code reuse. That's great. Let's go back to the program class and see how this is reflected in the code. We have some squigglies. We need to provide an animal type. Okay, well, let's just call this a cat. And we will write to a file. This would work. We could also Let's say we wanted to write this to memory. There you go. You can see how easy the method overloading is here to use and how there's a lot of utility in such a method. Now let's look into some more advanced use cases or some problematic use cases. So remember I was mentioning here about file stream. So let's say we wanted to write this file name, and then we wanted to say, okay, well, I want to change the extension for whatever reason. And so we provided the extension. Okay, well, all right, I guess that makes sense. But now what if, I'm trying to think of an example of how to do this because it's really hard to think on the fly. Okay, let's do the exact method that we have the problem with here that I saw in the file stream method. I'm going to create another write, but this time I am going to ask for a file mode. And if you have the file mode, you'll provide the file node. Simple enough, there's no problem here. But now, what happens if we want to also provide the file access? And here I'm about to create the error. Notice how I'm changing the formal parameter list. Now I'll scroll over so you can see. So now the signatures swap. And why this is a problem is when people are using our code and they try to type in the parameters, they're going to flip-flop and they're constantly toggling with these parameters. It's an absolute nightmare for people. So if you want to write good APIs and good code, keep your method list in the same order every time. It's absolutely essential. I'm going to delete these two because we don't need them. Now we say, okay, well, that's great. What about an operator overload? How can we overload operators? And many of you may have never even seen operator overloading because it's almost never used anymore. However, you can write some real hot garbage code with operator overloading. So I'm going to demonstrate how to do it. And whether you do it, that's kind of up to you, right? Operator overloads are always static in C#. You need a return type. You need the keyword operator, and then you need the operator you want to overload. In this case, we're going to overload the plus or the add operator. Then you have to provide in your parameters. Remember, plus takes 2 parameters for the output. There's a space here. So the way we're going to work this is we're going to create a new animal. This makes no sense because you can't just add 2 animals together, so I'm going to give them a crazy type. There, now we can literally add 2 animals together if we want to. And let's go back to the other code. We could say animal equals animal plus animal. The left animal here is the one that's provided into the formal parameter 1, and the right is provided into the formal parameter 2. And the result is that new unholy hybrid that we created. Pretty slick, huh? Okay, what have we gone over here? We've gone over operator overloading. We've gone over method overloading. What's missing is now something called default parameters. And this is where if you come from Python, you're really familiar with default parameters. Let me demonstrate a default parameter with our write method. We could have default parameters here. Let's actually change this. To suggest, okay, well now if you call this method, we're going to provide these default parameters. And many people say default parameters are better than method overloading. I'm not a fan. I don't actually like default parameters. I prefer method overloading. However, we have to realize there's really good use cases for both. This particular use case of writing is some absolute hot garbage. You would never do this in production, providing an either or for the default parameters. When we're using default parameters, we want something that we're always going to need information. We always need both parameters. It's just we don't necessarily need both values. So you would never use something like this in production. I guess a great way, a better example would be if we just wanted to create an animal. And we want to provide a name or a type. Cat will default to cats. And we could create, I don't know, a default age. And a default weight of 50. And this is how we could use the default parameters effectively. Now you'll also notice that this probably isn't the right way to do any of this because we should just use a constructor. Because of that, I will change this to a constructor. There we go. And now the astute among you will say, I just made an error. And the error you're going to see here is that I just assigned the same variable. I assigned the member to the, the astute among you will notice that I just assigned the property. The astute among you will notice that I just assigned the parameter to itself. That's not good. It is something that you need to be aware of. But let's say we didn't have anonymous properties. And I'm going to scroll up here, bear with me. And I'm going to create a random property called random, for lack of a better name. And now let's say I wanted to default in my constructor to have random equal to 0. Okay. I don't know why I keep putting semicolons there. We got a problem. What do we do in this instance? What most people do, and you'll see this quite a lot, is using this. This refers to the scope of the class. So it brings us outside the constructor and we can do that assignment. I'm not actually a big fan of this method. The method I actually like to do is to prefix a parameter whenever it's reused like this. Mainly, the reason has nothing to do with the code quality. The reason has to do with, I like to say, toolkit developers. A lot of developers won't look at their class file. Instead, they're going to rely entirely on IntelliSense and try to guess what to type. And you'll notice those sorts of developers, you'll see this all over the code. And what this means is the developers don't understand their class file and they're using IntelliSense to lean on and they're trying to guess what they need to type next. And that means to me, when I see code written in this style, I know that the developer really doesn't understand the entire class and it puts me on guard to look for obvious errors. And that's my flimsy justification for not using the this keyword. But I felt it'd be fair to show you that that keyword does exist. Well, let's summarize everything here. First, we have method overloading. Method overloading allows you to write the same method with different signatures. And then we have operator overloading, which will allow you to overload the basic operators like plus, minus, equals, double equals, whatever you want to your heart's content. Actually, you know what? You can't overload the single equals operator, so I'm crazy right there. You can't do that one. And finally, we did a basic introduction to visibility, and we did a basic introduction to the this operator for classes, and we briefly introduced constructors, but we didn't really dive into it. What I would like each of you to do now is open up your own project in C# and write your own class and try to write several method overloads. And when you do these method overloads, your goal, find legitimate reasons to overload your method or legitimate reasons to use default parameters, and try to find out which is better for your use case. Questions, comments, put them below.